Hi, and welcome to the latest Reasonable Measures podcast from Tangibly. Today, we're talking about a really great topic, which is the intersection of cybersecurity and trade secret protection. I'm Chris Buntel. I'm one of the co-founders of Tangibly. And joining me today on the mic is Nick McLeod from Invara. Nick, it's great to have you here.
Hey, Chris, great to be here.
Awesome. Could you just briefly say something about yourself and Invara and what brings you to this party?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, my name's Nick. I run a IP and cybersecurity consultancy called Invara. My background's in IP, mainly patents. Um, and more recently, we've gotten into this business of IP and cybersecurity together. So we're trying to bring these two worlds together. We've got a cybersecurity team that looks after that side of things, and basically, it's sort of aiming, I guess, to look at IP more holistically. So instead of just your registered patents, trademarks, designs, all the usual things, we're looking more closely, I guess, at the unregistered rights, so the trade secrets and the confidential information that really have that legal and cybersecurity crossover.
Oh, fantastic. And when we were talking about what to talk about today, it was really interesting because a lot of people kind of divorce cybersecurity as being an IT thing and trade secrets as being a legal one. And you had the interesting perspective that they're actually overlapped quite a bit. And cybersecurity is really part of one or more of those best practices that Tangibly always talks about. Do you find a lot of people see that connection, or are they really thinking of them as two discrete, different topics?
Yeah, I think people still do look at them as separate things. Even within companies, I think legal and IT or cybersecurity tend to be quite siloed. And that was one of my, I guess, perspectives working in a technology company. I was protecting all of the intellectual property and the IP, and sort of working quite closely with our IT and cybersecurity manager. And I realized that a lot of our most valuable information, software, source code, and test data and all that sort of stuff, is actually I wasn't really protecting that. That's kind of what he was doing. So I kind of got more interested in learning about sort of some of the tools that he was using, and that was kind of, I guess, the genesis behind Invara as well. So yeah, I think it's something that companies are only just sort of coming around to now, that these two things are quite related and really two sides of the same coin. That's how we sort of look at it. And particularly when you're looking at trade secrets, you've got obviously the reasonable measures kind of standard to achieve, and part of that obviously is the legal measures that you need, and then the other side is having pretty robust IT and cybersecurity measures, which I think as trade secrets in particular, I think have become more digital, certainly over the last decade or more. Most trade secrets now are stored, on computers, on servers. It's digital information and data, and so the cybersecurity measures which go around that are super critical.
And it's interesting, whenever I talk to IT or cybersecurity people, they don't think they're protecting trade secrets. Like, they don't see that connection. And it really goes both directions. So the legal kind of compliance angle, people view cybersecurity as an IT function. And then the cybersecurity people don't see themselves as building that castle wall to protect the trade secrets inside. So it's funny to me that both sides aren't really connecting the dots and seeing how that works. But
Yeah, so
Nick, you're
true. Yeah,
right.
like you go. I was going to say, you go to like cybersecurity conferences, and the focus is always about protecting personal information and personal data, and they make it sound like that's the only thing that these cyber criminals are after, and the reality is that's not the case. I guess those are the cases that tend to make the headlines more often than not, because there might be regulatory consequences if you lose a lot of privacy data and personal information. But and probably probably the corporate loss of corporate data is probably something which is quite underreported, actually, which might be a reason why the cyber folks don't tend to talk about it quite as much.
Well, and it's also interesting if you look at trade secret cases, the vast majority of them come from an employee who's planning on quitting their job the next morning. They log in at 3 a.m. or some ridiculous time and download 5,000 files or 8,000 files or 20,000 files. And you're right, it's all digital these days. Like no one is stealing a physical asset or writing down things on a post-it note. It's predominantly vast amounts of data downloaded onto their personal email or a thumb drive or some other vehicle that they can use to transport that digital data.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's not always that malicious sort of intent either. Like insiders take two different forms usually, right? Like you've got those ones you're talking about, which we sort of call malicious insiders that are deliberately stealing, going to a competitor, or they're going to start their own competing business. But what we see, I guess, more often than not, the vast amount of trade secrets which are actually leaked is from what we call like the negligent insider, which is basically an employee that is accidentally doing the wrong thing. Like there's usually no malice or intent behind their actions. They just, they think that the work that they've created or the software that they've written is theirs. They can take it when they leave.
Mm,
You see that one quite a bit.
sure.
And also just employees maybe that just haven't been educated enough around the importance of all of this kind of stuff. So they just do silly things like they share files with third parties that they shouldn't, or that they don't have NDAs in place with, or they upload data onto the cloud, or they send things to their personal emails. And the other big one we're seeing now, of course, is with AI. So you're getting a lot more examples, I guess, of negligent employees that are, either not following company policies, or maybe there isn't a company policy, and they're, uploading sensitive information into public LLMs like ChatGPT, and then, the company sort of finds out too late that, some of their sensitive corporate data has been misappropriated in that way. And, it's funny, I actually saw recently there was in the news, you probably saw the acting head of the US cyber agency. He was found to have uploaded a heap of sensitive government related information into a public chat GPT.
Yeah,
So,
anyone can do
it's
it.
anyone can do it. And often it's your most senior employees and board members and executives that can be the culprits.
And how does cybersecurity differ in terms of internal threats versus external threats? Like, are those handled differently or approached differently? And I'm also curious because at Tangibly, we always talk about 70% of the time it's your own coworkers or employees who, to your point, either negligently or intentionally are stealing trade secrets. And does cybersecurity kind of treat the threat vector the same way, or is it a little different?
No, it's quite different. I mean, a good analogy to think about it is kind of like a house, right? So you've got your external threat, like your burglars, that you're trying to keep them from coming in the front door through the windows. You're putting locks on the doors. So you've got various measures in a cyber sense that you're using to sort of try and keep those guys out. So you've got traditional perimeter defenses like firewalls and encryption and MFA and that kind of thing. And then, for the internal threat, the person's already inside the house. So, the way that you manage that threat is quite different. You might have your trade secrets locked away in a jewelry box in the house. So, for those sorts of that insider threat, it becomes, down to things like, role-based access control, for example. So, in the house analogy, you might not give them the key to every bedroom in the house, and you certainly wouldn't give them the key to the jewelry box. And then, you have, for example, software usually that can detect unusual movement of
Mm.
data from within the network as well. So you have policies and rules for, certain classifications of documents can't be, sent by email, that kind of thing. Um, And a lot of the software these days as well, like the monitoring software, has like AI behavioral analytics. So it learns kind of um, you know, what what activity a regular user typically does, what time of the day do they log in, what countries do they log in from what devices. So that it learns all of that. So then, when you have that rogue employee that decides to download 10,000 documents, that kind of activity should be flagged, and the software should basically cut that off straight away. So, a lot of those cases should probably never end up as trade secret misappropriation cases if companies had the right cyber measures in place. You'd certainly get the kind of alerts to detect that sort of behaviour. So, yeah, it is quite a different approach for internal, I guess, managing internal and external threat. But I guess there is a bit of crossover as well, because one of the things you hear about, I guess one of the philosophies is kind of assume compromise. So even for external threat, it's like you almost assume that the bad guy is already within your system. So then the controls kind of become a bit more similar to what you're doing to stop the internal threat, and sort of more managing at the data level, I guess. So really controlling access to the data and the trade secrets, and how that information can be, sent around the network or externally. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my pattern is maybe too unpredictable because I've in the past been tripped up multiple times where I'd log in from a different country or strange times of day, and that's just me. But it usually works well. Like if someone does have a predictable pattern, that kind of
Yes.
security can be pretty effective.
And that's where AI is, sort of in its element, right? Detecting those patterns and learning those behaviors, and it can learn what looks normal for your network as well. It's not just the users; it's just
Hmm.
what does normal
Sure.
network traffic look like? So that's where AI can be used in a positive way.
Well, in dealing with clients, and don't name names either good or bad, but do you have any war stories of either something that was handled extremely well by one of your clients, or maybe something that totally went off the rails that's a good learning opportunity for people?
Yep, lots of war stories. Well,
Excellent.
this one's not so much my war story, but there was actually a case in Australia that was in the news this week. It was actually a financial services company that was pursued by the corporate regulator in Australia for cybersecurity. Um, well, for a cybersecurity breach that ended in about 18,000 of their clients getting their personal information leaked onto the dark web.
Wow.
And this was the first time that the regulator basically taken this business to court, and the federal court just handed down their first civil penalty for a company, particularly a company that holds a financial services license that was found to breach their obligations in terms of cybersecurity. And when you read this case, it's like it's like a laundry list of basically things that just weren't done. There was just not even basic controls and procedures in place. There was no MFA, no role based access controls. They weren't doing vulnerability scanning and patching of critical software. And I believe that they didn't actually detect the breach themselves, so they were hacked. The attacker was in their system for quite some time. I think their information was leaked onto the dark web, and it was actually the sort of the Australian cybersecurity agency, which I think probably scanning the dark web found this information, and they alerted them that, hey, we think you guys have been breached, and they
Oh,
they weren't
lovely.
even aware. So it was just a total mess, and they've been fined accordingly. So that's, I guess, an example of where it all goes wrong. Where it all goes right, I've seen, yeah, there was one company I worked with that they were going through an offboarding process, and they were offboarding a whole heap of employees on the same day, and they had a process actually between HR and IT, which was running quite well for most of the morning. They finished the exit interview, they send a message to IT, disable the accounts now. They lose all their IT access, and then an hour or so later, they're sort of escorted out of the grounds. But at some point, that process broke down, and And there was a period of time where a few people were offboarded, but IT hadn't been notified that they'd gone. And there was one employee that he was actually quite cunning because he'd already actually downloaded a piece of software that he shouldn't have, that enabled him to basically send files out of the network to a personal computer at his home. And he started doing this. So he had about an hour or 2 hour window basically before they realized that he still had his access. And he downloaded a few files, and well, he started a file transfer process. And then this company had very good sort of threat detection and monitoring systems, and the system basically picked up this individual that doesn't normally do this kind of thing. This was an unusual thing for this user, so the software basically cut the data transfer. Some information, some files did get out, but it stopped it pretty quickly. Alerted the IT department, and then they basically looked into it, and they could piece together basically what happened, what he'd done, how he did it, which folders he accessed, which files, what he was trying to download, and then they quickly got legal involved, and they managed to stop it pretty quickly, and they made him delete all the data before it became something else. But I'm not sure if that was a malicious insider, or this was a guy perhaps that just mistakenly believed that this was software that he'd written or whatever, and he was entitled to take it with him. So, but
Yeah,
that,
it's
but that was a
hard
good
to tell.
example of the system working well and stopping the damage really before it could be too much.
Yeah, and Nick, tangibly, a lot of what we do is actually proactive, designed to lower risk and try to avoid trade secret theft, trade secret litigation. But yeah, if the litigation does happen, despite all your best efforts, you want to be positioned well to go after the person who stole the information or was acting maliciously. And
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective, do you view cybersecurity as like proactive or reactive? And how does it fit in that spectrum of effort?
I mean, it's absolutely both. I think, if you had to try and put a percentage on it, you'd probably say it's 70% proactive, 30% reactive. The goal is always to prevent the loss from occurring in the first place. So that's the end game. So you've got your strong system controls, your patching, your vulnerability scanning, your training. All these things are sort of preventive risk management measures that you take, all the governance and your policies. So you're trying to stop people doing the right thing. You're trying to stop bad people getting into your system, trying to stop the trade secrets and personal information being stolen. But then if it, I guess these days you have to assume that if somebody wants to breach you, they will breach you. So then you get into the reaction, how you respond quickly. So having an incident response plan is super critical. All businesses have to have one. So if you are breached, you immediately you're not trying to work out, oh, what do we do? What do we do? You straight away you've got a game plan. Everybody's got a role. They know what they're doing. You're engaging external legal counsel. You're getting probably an external cybersecurity firm to come in and start a forensic investigation. So, you're trying to limit the damage and respond as quickly as possible. So, companies that are doing this well can really minimize the damage, whereas companies that aren't doing it well, they're going to potentially, not even know they've been breached, like that financial services company. Or there's going to be, sort of a bad actor sitting in your system, just stealthily moving around for months sometimes, and they're just kind of working out, where your valuable data is, where your trade secrets reside. Maybe they're elevating their privilege, access, maybe by jumping around, getting credentials of different users, getting access to more things than they should, and you don't even know about it. So yeah, having a strong incident response plan is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and tangibly, we've found that going through a mock exercise for that is really helpful, where you can pretend or role play and or simulate an actual breach. And Yeah, at first it's kind of scary because you don't really know what to do, and if it's a real breach, you're probably very worried, very emotional, and if that's your first time dealing with it, it can be pretty challenging. But if you've gone through that simulation exercise maybe once a year or so, it doesn't feel so new and scary anymore.
Yeah, and I think those exercises can be, you can make them fun too, right? Like they can be quite engaging. You get all the key people in the room, and you can sort of make it into a bit of a fun exercise, so everybody kind of knows their roles. But it is important to know what you're going to do, and particularly if you get hit with ransomware, what's your position on, do we pay ransoms? Do we not pay ransoms? Is there some sort of threshold that might trigger a payment? Because they're very clever now. Like when most of these ransomware companies hit or organizations hit you, it's like double extortion, right? They encrypt all your data, so they lock everything up. You can't work, you can't access your systems. So, you might say, oh, we've got good backups, we can get everything back up and running, and that's all great. But then they've already exfiltrated the data as well. So, then they'll threaten to put that on the dark web and sell it to the highest bidder. And so, it's not a nice position to be in. So you definitely want to know how you're going to respond in advance.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll have one more question for you. And this one, it's an interesting question. It came to me first at the IAM conference in London last year. I'm going again in a few weeks. But someone asked me what seemed like a very simple question, but it actually turned into a big discussion, which is how do you know if your program, in this case, cybersecurity program, is successful or not? And I was asked the same thing about trade secrets. So it'll be interesting to compare your answer versus mine.
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. I think, you know, a good program, you'll have sort of technical indicators that the system is working. So you'll have various metrics that you're getting around how many threats were stopped, how many links were clicked that the system blocked, how many unusual behavior patterns were detected. So you'll get all this sort of reporting information. So I guess you have a technical indicator that the system is working well. Um, and then I guess you could also look at it and say, well, if you're aligned to some sort of framework, like an ISO 27001 or NIST, if your company is aligned to that framework, then you know that you've got good policies and procedures and good governance and controls around cybersecurity. So you're gonna, if you're gonna looking to partner with an organization that has that accreditation, you'd be pretty confident that they've got a good program in place. But I think from more of an internal company perspective, I think, if you have a good culture around security, I think that's the true indicator. If your employees really, really care and really understand, why we're doing what we're doing, why security matters, and sometimes it is an inconvenience, right? Like sometimes, employees, you're making them do things that, maybe they've got to go through an extra process or click a few more buttons to get what they need to get. But, if the culture's right and they understand that, okay, the reason I have to do this is because, security matters to our company. Once you get to that position, I think, you've got a really good cybersecurity program in place and that security matters.
Awesome. And when I was asked the question about trade secrets, I started off on this long, complicated answer, and I actually stopped myself halfway. It kind of was a moment of clarity. And I said, the way you know that you're successful is if it's kind of boring. You're not being sued, you're not suing anyone, you're not having trade secrets stolen. You kind of have your house in order, and all that translates to no drama. So that's kind of my goal now in setting up programs and working with clients and advisors is how can we make it so this is lacks drama and is a little bit on the boring side because that shows in a funny way or in an abstract way that you're actually being successful. If you have a lot of
No,
drama, something's wrong.
no, 100% agree with that. I think that's a great way of framing it. I think very much true for cybersecurity too. You want to stay out of the news. You want to stay
Mhm.
out of the regulators going after you. Just be boring and, do a good job.
That's right. Well, and on that note, thanks a lot, Nick. It's been great talking to you, and we look forward to seeing everyone on an upcoming podcast.
Awesome, Chris. Great
Thanks.
chat.